Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go, free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sheri Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on Friday, February 17th of 2023 from Contact Talk Radio. Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern is the new schedule for the dropping of my podcast on a weekly basis. So please just note it will no longer air on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific or 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're moving it just one day forward to Fridays, again at the same time, 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern. So this show still reminds you that it aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And from there you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show and or search the archived listings for past shows which you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And the show now, again, will drop every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, so you can listen then or anytime. And while you're there, you'll see above the most recently posted show a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, needs to be happy. And this is based on an interview I did with Steve a couple of years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it'll sign you up for my weekly Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, but you can, of course, unsubscribe anytime. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, again, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some astrological words of wisdom. Separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. I'm also posting on Instagram, so feel free to follow me there as well. And finally, I'm offering now a discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125 to radio show listeners only. So, if you're interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart and your purpose and mission in this lifetime, in order to gain greater consciousness about these things, and would like to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back now from achieving your most cherished desires in the areas of greatest interest to you. It could be your relationships, your career, your job, your finances, and or your health. Then this is the reading for you. This reading looks at how the energies into which you entered into this lifetime may be keeping you stuck in old habitual patterns or conditioned behavior, and how this knowledge can assist you to make different, more positive choices moving forward. So if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, it's easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer of a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125 at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get on now to this week's Astro News you can use. So the monthly lunar cycle's waning, or it was waning still, as the Sun conjoined Saturn in Aquarius yesterday, February 16th. But first, let's go back to Mercury's entrance into Aquarius on February 11th and the Venus-Neptune conjunction in Pisces, which perfected February 15th. Now, I described Mercury's entrance into Aquarius as the ability to experience a change in perspective. And that's because now we're coming out of a more Mercury in Capricorn-ish, what's love got to do with it attitude, and into more Aquarian, humanitarian, forward-thinking, and outside-the-box themes, at least until Mercury enters Pisces, after conjoining with Saturn in Aquarius. Both of those happen on March 2nd. So since Aquarius is essentially an archetypal energy that likes to march to the beat of its own drummer, Mercury here can broaden our understanding that all humans are created equal and deserving of not only empathy, but respect. And when combined with the beginning of a new uber-compassionate Venus-Neptune cycle, the collective may well be filled with aha moments and similar revelations that promote a new there but for the grace of God go I attitude. So as we begin to view things a bit differently than before, we may well be moving into an era of greater empathy and compassion for others now. So if we look at recent events, such as the earthquake in southern Turkey and northern Syria, which at this point has claimed more than 35,000 lives, and we note the outpouring of assistance from all over the world, we may better understand how the waxing Venus-Neptune energy manifested days later within the collective. And this is true also for those responding compassionately to the horrific circumstances that continue under Russia's relentless attacks on both the infrastructure and civilian lives as it targets homes and other resources such as hospitals and schools in Ukraine. Now, between these two events, the earthquake following the February 5th Leo full moon square Uranus and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, ongoing now for almost a year, we get a sense of humanity and its capability to express grief, sorrow, empathy, compassion, etc. for those less fortunate. Mercury in Aquarius can like to take up the cause of the underdog or the downtrodden. And clearly, these are two prime examples of those who need Mercury's help to spread the message globally that assistance is needed, or humanitarian assistance is needed. So here's a New York Times piece published just after the Venus-Neptune sextile by someone in Syria, where help was even later in arriving than in Turkey, expressing his experience there. Let's remember, too, that Neptune has a lot to do with both film, photography, and images in general. And this gentleman wrote, quote, "Many people have posted these images of grotesque horror on social media without so much as a comment, a caption, or even a few words to accompany them. In doing so, they're sending two messages. The first is the thing made manifest in their shock, the stunning, staggering scale of the catastrophe. The second is the feeling of abandonment and despair felt by the whole country and as harrowing as the earthquake itself. These apocalyptic scenes have at once brought out a poignant spirit of solidarity and mutual assistance and kindled people's instinct to share, to gather witness, to leave a mark, to make their voices heard. In the rubble-heaped center of every major city, anyone within reach of a reporter's microphone seems to be shouting, 'Film here, We need help. We need food. Where's the government? Where are the rescue teams? So we have also the senselessly tragic shooting of the on the Michigan State campus, which occurred on February 13th, just hours after the waning third quarter fixed square of the Scorpio moon to the Aquarius sun that day, that left 3 students dead and 5 critically injured. So another example of the Venus-Neptune energy manifesting within the collective, we have this headline and story from the Washington Post on February 15th, which is the day that the Venus-Neptune conjunction perfected in Pisces. And the headline reads, "After shots rang out in Michigan, community responds with acts of kindness." And the article goes on to say, on a Facebook crisis response page launched amid the Michigan shooting, many locals immediately offered help in the form of car rides, safe spaces, hugs, and psychological support. Quote, "I'll drive you from campus to home if you want to go home for a few days," one person wrote. "If anyone needs a safe space to decompress away from campus, please reach out," another post read. Others offered the safety of guest rooms and the comfort of their pets. A priest said he was available to provide prayers. A clinical social worker offered trauma therapy to those suffering mentally. "You can come and stay with our family for a few days if your family is out of town," another person wrote. While Michigan's psychological care offered mental health treatment support or just a listening ear. While acts of kindness flooded social media, nurses and medical staff in the community rushed to Sparrow Hospital to help those injured in the shooting. "We actually sent most of them home," hospital spokesman John Foran said of those who volunteered. "We did have a lot of people who stepped up." And in addition, President Biden spoke with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer Monday night, or that night, about the shooting that killed 3 and injured 5 on Michigan State University's campus. Quote, "President Biden and the First Lady are praying for the 3 killed and others injured in East Lansing," White House spokesman Karine Jean-Pierre wrote in a tweet. Now, we also learned about the death of sex symbol Raquel Welch on February 15th, something that I believe touched the hearts of many within the collective as the Venus-Neptune conjunction occurred. A film star, Welch was well known for her beauty throughout her career. She became a sex symbol, as someone pointed out on one of those Entertainment Tonight shows the other day. Almost every adolescent, teenage, or young adult boy or man had a poster of her on their wall when they were young, particularly from the film 1 Million BC, where she was dressed in a bikini. Now, she died at the age of 84 due to what the press has called, quote, "an unnamed illness." How Neptunian, right? Anyway, many of a certain age will mourn her passing as the end of an era. Now, following the culmination of the Venus-Neptune conjunction in empathetic, spiritually inclined, I feel ya kind of energy, the Sun conjoined Saturn in Aquarius February 16th. This is an aspect of commitment, like serious commitment. And it permits us to commit, because it's in Aquarius, to humanitarian causes at the highest, most profound level of potential meaning. And also in Aquarius, it asks us to commit to either joining with like-minded souls who care about humanity's future progress, or to go our own way, follow the beat of our own drummer, and find security in trusting that our own path may deviate from that of the rest of society. So we saw several groups rally to march as this Sun-Saturn conjunction was waxing into fruition. And what I believe we got a taste of foreshadows of Pluto's imminent entrance into Aquarius on March 23rd. And that's because we're seeing people taking to the streets again, just as they did when Saturn wavered back and forth between Aquarius and Capricorn during his retrograde period, which occurred during the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. I've long said I believe we'll see a recurrence of this type of energy, the clamoring for societal reform, when Pluto repeats this back and forth Aquarius to Capricorn retrograde period between his ingress into Aquarius like I said, on March 23rd, and November 2024, when he moves into Aquarius for good until March 2043, when he'll enter Pisces for the first time. So one of these marches was in Florida and was geared towards speaking out against Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' attempts to control the educational curriculum there by diluting an advanced placement high school course of its Black history content. A Black history advanced placement course that he diluted the content of, okay? Never mind the outright book bans he's been endorsing and that the state legislature is trying to enforce by law. So this perfectly illustrates, in my opinion at least, that we want to be careful we're not committing to something that's so ideologically fixed in nature that we shut out our ability to remain open to the ideas or opinions of others. Aquarius energy can refuse to budge from its own stance, which can give this archetype a bad name in the end. Governor DeSantis, I'm looking at you. MSNBC news program host Joy Reid mentioned on February 15th that there was a time when it was illegal to teach a slave to read. And now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is trying to make it, if not illegal, then inappropriate to place books in libraries that teach people about Black history and teach advanced placement high school courses on the same subject. And Reid pointed out that there's a 1994 law in Florida saying that Blacks have the right to be taught African American history, but that currently there are only 11 Florida counties where this is happening, and that those are subject to a task force overseeing if it's being taught correctly. And the reason for this law, this 1994 law, comes from a Rosewood case, which was a Black town that was wiped out by white supremacists, where reparations were made to Black residents, according to Reid. So it's not clear now how it could be illegal in Florida to teach this history. And one of her guests pointed out that, and here I'm going to quote, DeSantis rules by fear and not by paying attention to things like housing or food crises in the state. He's made a point of stifling Black voices. Florida teachers rank as the 45th lowest in terms of pay, and many are afraid to teach Black history at this point. So DeSantis is trying to referee how it's taught, and teachers won't teach it because they're afraid of being fired, which is tantamount to teacher intimidation. So the protest in Florida on February 15th centered on the restrictions to teaching Black history, which recently came to light through the College Board, the entity that creates the curriculum for advanced placement high school courses, and how their AP-approved course caved into Florida's objections to certain portions of this curriculum, which included teaching or using certain books. And at this rally, Reverend Al Sharpton said this, and here I quote, there were no intersectional groups involved in making these decisions. How does DeSantis decide what Black history should be comfortable for students to learn? It's an insult even to white Floridians for others to decide what they can handle. And if this holds, it will go all over the country. It must stop here in Florida. So we might note that on February 15th, as the Sun-Saturn conjunction energy waxed in Aquarius, also, what DeSantis is saying is the buck kind of stops here, right? We got to take responsibility. We've got to make a commitment, because Sun-Saturn, if it's anything, it's a commitment. So we might note also that on February 15th, again, as the Sun-Saturn conjunction energy was waxing, that Fox News lost its bid to dismiss the case brought by Dominion and Smartmatic, the two companies accused by the likes of Rudy Giuliani and Fox News hosts like Judge Jeanine Pirro of tampering with voting machines in a good number of states throughout the U.S. during the November 2020 presidential election. And this means the case will proceed to trial, especially as reports indicate that neither Dominion nor Smartmatic is willing to settle out of court. So whether that's for the ideological reason of squelching the future ability of Fox and potentially other one-sided news organizations like OAN and Newsmax from lying on air or not, I don't really know, but I'd be willing to wager a guess that this may well be the case. In other words, they want to set a precedent. And again, close to the Sun-Saturn conjunction. So the Sun-Saturn equals commitment. Aquarius equals commitment to an ideology. In this case, that partisan media organizations have no right to lie about others because that's known legally as defamation. And on February 16th, the day of the exact Sun-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, the news brought us this, that a special Georgia grand jury examined attempts by Donald Trump and the former president's allies to overturn his 2020 loss in the state and released portions the day of this Sun-Saturn conjunction. So under Georgia law, the grand jury must release its report to the public. However, the judge in this case limited this report's release to only a 5-page portion of it to, quote, protect the due process rights of people named in it, according to the New York Times. So as per the released portion of this report, the Georgia grand jury concluded, and this is again from the Times, quote, no widespread fraud took place in the Georgia 2020 presidential election that could result in overturning that election. So they rejected the arguments made by Mr. Trump and his supporters. And the jurors said they believed that at least one unnamed witness who testified in the inquiry may have committed perjury and should face indictment. Now, the jury heard months of private testimony from 75 different witnesses, including the former president's allies and state officials, before sending their recommendations to Fulton County District Attorney Fani T. Willis, who will decide whether to bring charges. And she said already during a hearing last month that her decision was, quote, imminent, but that she has not specified exactly what that means. So a central element of the investigation is the now famous call by Mr. Trump on January 2nd of 2021, during which he told Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, that he needed to, quote, find 11,780 votes, which is the number he needed to overcome Joseph Biden's lead in the state in the presidential election. And again from the Times, quote, the special grand jury report excerpts released on Thursday do not make it clear whether the panel recommended specific indictments, but prosecutors overseeing the investigation into whether former President Donald Trump and his allies interfered in the 2020 presidential election in Georgia are known to have informed nearly 20 people that they could face criminal charges. That includes Rudolph Giuliani, Mr. Trump's former lawyer, who was told over the summer that he was a target of the investigation, which has focused on topics including a plan to urge lawmakers in swing states to appoint different slates of electors than those chosen by voters. David Schaefer, the Georgia Republican Party chair, and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones have also received target letters. They were among the 16 alternate pro-Trump electors in Georgia. Another possible target is John Eastman, the lawyer who developed strategies to block the certification of the 2020 election. So potential charges in the case include conspiracy to commit election fraud or racketeering-related charges for engaging in a coordinated scheme to undermine the election. So again, I think we can see from the Sun-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius that a group of people, I mean, the courts are committed, right, to, I guess, investigate, or they've already investigated, to the potential of indicting a group of people, not just one, in this case. So we'll stay tuned and see, how that plays out. So let's look ahead now for a moment. Mercury's sextile to Jupiter, February 17th, provides us all opportunities for a greater generosity of feeling, so that new perspectives arrived at through sudden revelations may well concern us with the larger issues of life and how they fit into our overall future plans. You know, like maybe love, especially universal love, does actually have something to do with it all, as this is following our Venus-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And when the sun journeys into Pisces February 18th, we may dig deeply and discover how our unconscious drives, those based on past habitual behavior, no longer serve us now. It's then we may grow in consciousness through such higher knowledge and escape any habitual tendencies to play the victim and instead take full responsibility for our own thoughts and actions as we move forward. And on February 19th, a Venus-Pluto sextile intensifies our need for love and for belonging, and ushers us towards the Pisces new moon, which occurs at 1 degree 22 minutes of Pisces at 11:06 p.m. Pacific time on February 19th and 2:06 a.m. Eastern time on February 20th. Because both luminaries are just past, but still considered conjoined to Saturn in Aquarius, this lumination asks us to commit to doing our part to work hard to manifest a better world into concrete reality. And Venus's entrance into Mars-ruled Aries, also February 19th or 20th, just after the Pisces new moon perfects, can motivate us to do just that, especially as Mercury in Aquarius is sextile to wounded healer Chiron in Aries February 20th helps provide innovative solutions to healing both personal and collective wounds now. So also at this Pisces new moon is a fixed Mercury in Aquarius square to Uranus and Taurus, culminating February 21st, which can bring rapid revelations, but also produce scattered thinking. So it's best to jot down any exciting new thoughts, but to save checking the details for another day, as concentration on those details is not this aspect's forte. Instead, expect the day's tempo to be brisk and thoughts speedy, which might prove anything from exciting to nerve-wracking, depending on how we handle disruptions or deviations to our normal routine. The best advice I can give people is to remain as flexible as possible, especially since Mercury in Aquarius is Aries trine to Mars in February. The next day on February 22nd can increase our concentration by providing us with the necessary energy to handle our thoughts more constructively now. So we can pierce through the heart of any matter and settle it quickly, which increases our chances of circumventing obstacles by expressing ourselves more freely about issues of importance. And this is a perfect aspect for public speaking success because it allows us to test some of our recent aha moment revelations on an audience of listeners. Now, the Pisces new moon essentially says that we can all become who we want to become, but only through clarity of intention, hard committed work, freedom of expression, and a certain kind of acceptance of the world as it is right now. And only then can we envision that which we wish, what we're wishing for. Pisces, when the sun and moon come together, is a very dreamy aspect, but because it's conjunct Saturn, it's a little less dreamy, it's a little more focused, it's a little more like saying, if I can dream it, I can make it happen. So if we can envision what we want, or what we wish for, we can then successfully manifest this and create a better world moving forward into the future. Okay, I wanted to shift gears now for a few to talk about Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, who held that office from 2011 through 2017, when she was appointed the U.S. ambassador to the UN by then President Donald Trump in January 2007, and resigned her South Carolina governorship for that post at that time after she was confirmed by the Senate. Now, we don't have a birth time for Nikki Haley, but we do have the rest of the data, which is that she was born on January 20th, 1972 in Bamberg. I'm sorry, hang on. Is it Bamberg or Bramberg? I think it's Bamberg. Yeah, Bamberg, South Carolina. And that was, January 20th, 72, Bamberg, South Carolina. So again, there's no birth time. And what I was taught to do, is to run a noon chart, because that gives us the moon midway through the day. And for her, that comes out at noon on January 20th of 72 at 24 degrees and 20 minutes of Pisces. Now, bear in mind that one's moon, if it's pegged only till noon, could be approximately 6 degrees more or less, which, interestingly enough, if it's 6 degrees less, obviously she's a Pisces moon from the 12, from midnight, 1 second after midnight, right? Until, in this case, when I researched it, it could push her moon to 1 degree 24 minutes of Aries if she was born past 9:26 p.m. on that day. So bear that in mind. But I don't really want to focus on her moon, except to say that it is pretty interesting to note that her announcement that she's running for president of the United States was made on February 14th, as the Venus-Neptune conjunction in Pisces was still waxing towards its exact conjunction at, guess what, degree? 24 degrees and 4 minutes Pisces, the following day on the 15th. So, rather than dwell on that, but I just noticed how interesting in the you can't make this you-know-what up kind of way we say in astrology. I wanted to talk more about the Pluto transit currently happening in her chart. And again, since we don't have her exact time of birth, we lack her ascendant sign and degree and the houses into which her planets fall. However, we can see everything else, except, of course, the aforementioned exact degree of the moon. Now, I would just point out that, the other planets are pretty much the same, in the same degree for that 24-hour period. It is possible that some of the faster moving planets, like the Mercury or something, might be a few minutes or a minute or two different, and only occasionally will that push it into another sign. So for the most part, we can be pretty sure that the rest of the planets are where they were for the full 24-hour period. Anyway, so what we can spy right away is that Nikki Haley has a sun at 29 degrees and 44 minutes of Capricorn. And that means we know, since Pluto's about to wax into or take its first dip into Aquarius soon on March 23rd, that today he's transiting at 29 degrees and 8 minutes of Capricorn. So normally when Pluto hits one's sun, we can be pretty sure that a part of this person's ego is going to have to die in order for something new to be born. So it seems that from now until Pluto enters Aquarius for the next 20 years in November 2024, which is to say he'll go back and forth between now and the presidential election of November 2024, that transiting Pluto will conjoin her sun that whole time and then be separating for a certain period. So what will the new Nikki Haley look like as she evolves during this process? And I think one way or another we can assume that she is on a quest for power. Frankly, I don't see how anyone can think otherwise of someone who is declaring the run for president. Of course, others, I think everyone who runs for president wants power, because I think that's something we would take for granted, but how they want to use that power is what's in question. So whether she wants to become president or simply to ascertain another position of power, such as becoming a cabinet member or a presidential advisor, for example, she needs to be careful with Pluto rocking and rolling over her 29-44 Capricorn Sun, again, between now and November 2024, that she doesn't provoke a lot of opposition because her aims are purely selfish. Now, I'm not saying they are, but I'm saying if they are. So this transit for her, and when we look at a transit by a slow-moving planet like Pluto, we usually give it a degree on either side of the planet it's transiting. So in this case, 28-44 Capricorn to 0-44 Aquarius. So again, we know that that's going to last, because I looked it up in the ephemeris, until December 2024, before it starts to ebb, its energy starts to wane. Now, what's interesting too is that if we look at the chart for the time of the announcement of her candidacy, and I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, so I'll come back with that next week, but it has Pluto on the ascendant. So it seems pretty certain that she's going to get a lot of pushback. Now, Pluto on one's ascendant, whether it's natal or by transit, usually indicates that they are being tasked to empower themselves, right? So, but they may get a lot of, like I said, pushback or confrontations when they try to assert themselves. So I think she's going to have to take great care not to harness this transit of Pluto to her Sun's energy for, quote, the purpose of unenlightened egotism, as Rob Hand, astrologer Rob Hand, puts it in his great book, that delineates transits, called Planets in Transit. So the question, too, is how Haley decides to play it. She'd be running against Trump, despite the fact that she's mostly all in on Trumpism. And as Robert Hand also notes in his Planets in Transit about the Pluto conjunct the Sun transit, quote, the best way to ensure handling the energy of this transit well is to concentrate it on your own life. It is best not to try to dominate others, even for their own good. He further cautions that what one does during this transit should not be, quote, to satisfy a sense of ambition. So are the odds against Haley from the start, or is the potential for her to misuse this current transit's energies diminished because while Pluto's rocking over her Sun, he's also simultaneously trining her natal Saturn, which sits at 29 degrees 41 minutes of Taurus, for really roughly the same period of time equivalent to, Pluto going over Sun. So transiting Pluto trine natal Saturn can note attention to detail in order to set a solid foundation for the future. And Saturn's always about work. So, we don't have to interpret as literal work in terms of a 9-to-5 job, but it's what we work at every day, whether we're a stay-at-home mom or whether we're the CEO of a company. So we might assume in Haley's case that this transit could be about future employment. And this aspect also illustrates that Haley has strong powers of endurance. And in addition to signifying, quote, external changes to your work, profession, or any other important activity in your life, according to Rob Hand, one has, quote, a phenomenal ability to contend with adversity if you have to. So we might then assume that Haley's capable of withstanding whatever Pluto on the ascendant at her recent announcement, brings, which came, as we know, as the Sun waxed into its conjunction with Saturn in Aquarius, and as we're approaching the Pisces new moon conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. So, is she going to commit to making the world a better place? Is that on the table now, as it is for all of us? And the question becomes, what defines better, right? For Haley, that might be an anti-choice, pro-gun, And she's got a T-square from Mercury in Capricorn to Mars in Aries opposite Uranus in Libra. So make of that what you will, but it looks to me like the potential for making somewhat surprising or explosive arguments from a conservative point of view. So will she win those arguments or not? So for example, if she was against Trump and then allied with Trump and now she's going to compete with Trump, but she still is extremely representative of Trumpism, where will she try to differentiate herself? And in what ways might that prove surprising? Now, meanwhile, that same transiting Pluto is also going to trine her natal Pluto. He's short of she has a grand trine between her Capricorn Sun, Saturn in Taurus, and Pluto, but Pluto's in 1 degree of Aquarius. It's 1 degree 58 minutes, 1 degree 58 minutes of Libra. So the Sun in Capricorn trines the Saturn in Taurus, but it's out of sign. Both of them are outer sign trine to Pluto, but only by like 1 or 2 degrees. So the question of whether that still creates a grand trine, even though it's not all in the same element, and I would say yes, it does, but it might differ slightly because not all of the elements are, in harmonious signs. So it might not flow as easily. In any case, again, transiting Pluto is also going to trine her natal Pluto at 1 degree 58 minutes of Libra, which perfects circa mid-April of 2024. And that should prove a stabilizing force for her, which to me would mean that wherever she lands, she will still probably have to make changes in her life to eliminate all that does not serve her. And if she doesn't do this, because, Pluto is, again, death and rebirth, right? We got to tear down the old in order to make room for the new. But if she doesn't do this, she may experience difficulties down the road. Now, Pluto trine Pluto is going to be a generational transit rather than a strictly personal one. So the message of that trine in her particular specific individual chart is still a generational one, or one for an entire generation, not just for Haley personally. However, that in turn brings up the option for her to accept societal changes happening around her during this period, or to reject them and perhaps experience stress or obstacles related to her resistance to such changes later on down the road. Now, and we think of that in the context, again, of Pluto entering and retrograding back and forth between entering Aquarius and going back into Capricorn over this very crucial time during her, we would essentially assume that by next spring, like late winter, early spring, right? And wasn't it South Carolina that is now voted by the Democrats to be the first state to have the primaries? So that's a kind of big deal since she's very well known then. But once then, I don't know what that date is, but it would be earlier than normal, I think, or earlier than it normally occurs in South Carolina. So it could be February or March of next year, which is only a year away. So, again, while the chances might seem slim right now, she's not polling very well compared to Trump and DeSantis. She's polling like 1%. And so is Mike Pence, who hasn't really declared yet. So the chances might seem slim for her to win the GOP presidential nomination. I think it's pretty clear from these Pluto transits that she'll probably gain something from trying, especially if the GOP does win the presidency in November 2024. But again, combined with Pluto's entrance into Aquarius soon and Saturn's into Pisces on March 7th for the next 2.5, 3 years, I'm not sure she'll be able to transform her Trumpism into convincing both independents and those in the GOP who don't want to ban abortion completely in cases of incest and rape, etc., or those whose kids are in danger in schools from shooters that she's the one for the job. And that's just a few things, she's pretty typically conservative. I mean, according to Wikipedia, she said, Haley describes herself as pro-life and has supported legislation to restrict abortion. She has stated, I'm not pro-life because the Republican Party tells me. I'm pro-life because all of us have had experiences of what it means to have one of these special little ones in our life. I mean, you can see right there, kind of, all of us have had experiences. Well, maybe not, but she's making an assumption, right? Anyway, I'm not gonna disparage Capricorn Suns because my mother was one, and I loved her dearly. But still, it's a bit of a anything from a naive to a kind of boundaried or restricted kind of thing to say, right? Doesn't everybody feel that way? Well, maybe not, Haley. Anyway, in 2016, when she was governor of South Carolina, she re-signed a new state law that bans abortion at 20 weeks of pregnancy. Now, given what's been going on around the country, that's pretty lenient. So, it'll be interesting to see how she navigates this. As Haley has voted also in favor of some bills relating to abortion that were tabled or rejected, including the inclusion of unborn child/fetus in definition for civil suits amendment, prohibiting employment termination due to abortion waiting period amendment, and exempting cases of rape from abortion waiting period amendment. So this shows that she does have some flexibility, right? The latter would have allowed specific cases of women to not have to wait the mandatory 24 hours before having an abortion. So again, how Haley handles this issue during this period of her personal Pluto transits may also depend on other major transits to her chart between now and November 2024. And one of the things I do notice is that Saturn will exact conjoin her natal Venus at 4 degrees and 58 minutes of Pisces near the end of April this year in 2023, again when Saturn's retrograde around mid-August of this year, and a final time when Saturn is direct again circa mid-January of 2024. Now that's an aspect of either commitment or the loss of a commitment. And conjunctions in astrology can work either way. I mention this too because I once had a client with Saturn exact on his 4th house Venus, whose wife had filed for divorce a few months before, and within 6 months of her filing, he had a new girlfriend, and that was a relationship that ended up lasting for a couple of years. So we should, it's a touch and go. It's an either way, right? So I wouldn't necessarily assume that Saturn coming to someone's Venus is fortuitous. It depends on the rest of the chart. But we can also note that transiting Saturn will also be squaring her natal Saturn and quincunxing her natal Pluto before transiting Saturn gets to square her, before transiting Saturn gets to conjoin her natal Venus. So, there may be some adjustments with that quincunx, and Saturn square Saturn is part of the 29.5-year Saturn cycle, and she'll be in the waning 3rd quarter. So I noticed, too, that her progressed moon is conjoined right now to her progressed north node. And that also would be a fortuitous time to announce a nomination. Not a nomination, but she's running for the nomination. And but that moon is in the latter stages of the 27.5-year progressed lunar cycle, meaning things are waning. But, we've seen before that people can be in that cycle. I think it happened with Donald Trump, and still be elected president. Now, the North Node, when any planet conjoins the North Node, it's usually fortuitous unless that planet in the natal chart is not in good shape. And one of the things we know from her natal chart too, assuming the degree of her moon, but likely no matter what that is for that 24-hour period, that her moon squares Jupiter, which just normally means you can be, a little scattered and very busy. It's still not a bad or a negative aspect. It squares her part of fortune, and it opposes out of sign her natal Pluto. So it will be kind of interesting. I mean, moon opposite Pluto is normally indicative of someone who has an intense relationship with their mother. And so it can indicate difficulties with women in general. Now, the sun, of course, like I said, trines but out of sign that Pluto, and so does Saturn. And Saturn and the sun traditionally are more male figures, or male archetype, especially a sun in Capricorn. So she may win more favor with men than with women. I don't really know. But it'll be interesting to see either way. So part of what I'd surmise as we watch this play out is that Haley will really have to decide, again, if she's all in on Trumpism, especially if the societal tide begins to turn against such thinking. And that's probably more the question right now for the GOP in general, especially with the looming debt ceiling dispute, gun control, abortion, and education very much on the minds of voters, hopefully still over the next 2 years as the GOP remains in control of the House of Representatives. Now, I've pretty much run out of time to touch on some of the other topics that I wanted to continue to talk about, which are balloons in the sky, especially since I'd mentioned Mercury in Aquarius and that period. And, it's like balloons galore all of a sudden. They're all over the place. I just read this morning, I think, that Romania has one and Moldova has one. Presumably, there's a balloon was sighted over Kyiv in Ukraine. And the supposition for that is that the Russians had floated a balloon in order to, because it has something attached to it that interrupts or what's the word? It reflects, and so it can confuse the missiles. So in other words, the Russians want to float this balloon over Kiev so that Kiev will shoot at it, thinking it's an incoming missile, and then waste its ammunition. And then later on, Russia can come in and attack that point because it can also pinpoint where the Ukrainian artillery was shot from. All right. So there's a lot going on still with this, with this whole thing. Now, I think we shot down 3 or 4 or something, unidentified flying balloon objects, Alaska and the United States, and on the east and on the west, and again in other countries too. So that's an interesting thing. I wanted to touch on just briefly again the fact that Hygeia, the goddess asteroid of health, and Pluto are scheduled to conjoin on March 3rd, which I mentioned last week, and talked about the rise in the COVID vaccine prices, 400%. I talked about this conservative Texas judge ruling on mifepristone, the morning after abortion pill, which could result in a ban throughout the entire United States on prescriptions, etc. So what I wanted to add to the mix now is the fact that there was a train derailment in a town called, I've heard it pronounced Palestine and Palestine, Ohio, that resulted in a chemical spill. And that this chemical spill is playing out very weirdly because first the local municipality told everyone to leave their homes if they could. People have reported that pets and animals are dying. People are reporting that they can taste it or it's in their sinuses and their tongue and their mouth. And a lot of people left their homes, but they came back again because they were told it was safe. And then after that, they were told not to drink the water. So if anyone's interested in this issue, I suggest an interview that I watched on Wednesday with Nicole Wallace on MSNBC of Erin Brockovich, because what she mentioned is that it's known that there's benzene in the water because there was benzene as part of the chemicals that these rail carriers were carrying. and that's a big deal, and that the local waters flow into a river which flows into the Mississippi, and that this could have much longer term repercussions on a negative aspect in terms of poisoning. And so they also said, like, those who use local wells, right, for water, not to drink the water. So there's a lot of suspicion around what people are being told. There's a lot of information that's not yet clear, and there's a lot of fear in the local population of developing cancers or anything else, or anything more sudden that will harm people or, in fact, expedite their demise. So I'm going to end on that note, and though it's not the most pleasant one to end on, but to thank everyone for joining me today, and to say that I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me again next week on February 24th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.